you just can't make a direct comparison right now because it's an unfair comparison to humans.
Perhaps the biggest topic in transportation in the past several years has been autonomous vehicles, especially truly driverless vehicles. Some self-driving passenger vehicle operations have been underway for a few years now, and driverless trucks are expected to hit Texas highways here pretty soon, actually. So although autonomous vehicle technology has advanced significantly over the past several years, there's at least one study that suggests that maybe it's not quite ready for prime time. So with me to talk about that study is Dr. Missy Cummings, who is a professor at George Mason University. She was also one of the first American female fighter pilots and previously served as senior advisor to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So thank you for joining me, Dr. Cummings.
So great to be here.
So yeah, a lot of surveys continue to kind of reveal that, most US motorists maybe not too trusting of self-driving vehicles. And as your study points out, we keep hearing reports on crashes and federal investigations and stuff like that. So from what I understand, you kind of wanted to know, what was going on with these vehicles. So kind of walk me through, what you looked at and, some of the key results that you found.
Well, my research was a direct byproduct of the standing general order. So there is currently an order, we're not sure how long it's going to be there, that companies with any kind of either driving assist or self-driving car, if they get involved in a crash that meets specific criteria, like the airbag is deployed, for example, then they have to report this crash to the federal government. And then that data is archived. And then that allowed me, in conjunction with similar data that's reported to the state of California, to really start looking at what is going on with these crashes. You will hear a lot of hubbub from Waymo, for example, trying to claim that their vehicles are safer than human drivers. These analyses are just not legitimate because the self-driving cars have not generated enough miles to be directly compared to human drivers. So I wanted to go beyond the are self-driving cars safer than humans because I just don't really think this is a very productive discussion to have. What I wanted to look at then went beyond that to say, well, what are the nature of these crashes? What can we learn about how and why certain kinds of crashes are happening? And is there something else we being the people in academia, for example, is there something else we need to be doing to help these cars become more safe?
Sure. And I want to get into some of the specifics on the crashes, but I want to first go over some of the general findings here. So, to me, one of the most striking findings is the non-fatal crash rates. And so, and stop me at any time I get something wrong here. But from what I gleaned from your study is that, so for human drivers, for example, there are about 200 non-fatal crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And you looked at three self-driving vehicle companies, and it looks like the rate for those companies are in the thousands of the thousands of crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So it appears that self-driving vehicles are far less safer than human drivers, as you pointed out, but you've somehow been able to quantify that. So when it comes to that crash rate, what is it that you found, and is that something what can we extrapolate from that data?
Well, I mean, just as I said before, the crash rates are still extremely preliminary
Yeah.
because the car companies have just not generated enough miles to even get into the. I mean, human drivers annually generate more than 1 trillion miles.
Um,
The self-driving cars are just generating millions of miles. So it's really an unfair comparison. And this is where, Waymo isn't very happy with me, but I like to point this out is that, look, you just can't make a direct comparison right now because it's an unfair comparison to humans. When you do make that comparison, and what you can see in this paper is that I look at the data over a 2-year period. The data, particularly for companies like Amazon and Cruise, which is no longer in operation, wildly fluctuates. And these kind of wild fluctuations are a significant byproduct of the nascent nature of these operations. Waymo has consistently more miles. I think the best, if we're giving Waymo a huge benefit of the doubt, I would be comfortable saying at best they are on par with rideshare drivers, which is about 4 to 6 times more dangerous than your average driver, which that kind of result is actually, it should make people pause. What is going on with these rideshare drivers? Why are rideshare drivers,
Right.
et cetera? Like, why are they so dangerous? And it really is caused by the fact that they're being forced to look at their phones. But I mean, that's if I'm being extra, extra kind and extra, extra generous, giving Waymo every single benefit of the doubt. Uh, but that's why in that paper I went further to say, okay, well, the crash rates are still not scientifically valid. So what can we look at when we look at the nature of the crash? And I'll tell you what really concerns me, and especially related to trucks, is the fact that we can start to see a very dangerous pattern of what we would call phantom braking. This is where the autonomy on board, the truck, car, whatever, sees something that isn't there and does a hard braking maneuver. We can see it in the data that it's causing collisions, rear end collisions, 2 times more often than what happens for your average human driver. And for human drivers, our rear end collisions are actually generally at very slow speeds. But this is a big deal for trucks because if a semi-tractor trailer hits an emergency braking maneuver on a highway because it saw something that wasn't there, I mean, I come from a long line of truckers. That truck is going to jackknife. There's going to be carnage on the road. And so for trucks, the ramifications of the phantom braking events are far more dire than I think for your average passenger vehicle.
For sure. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to bring up because you found that there's several different type of crash events that you're able to recognize here. The most common one being being struck from behind, as you pointed out, probably the likely culprit there being phantom braking. But the question to you is like, isn't that technology pretty much already available though with in the form of automatic emergency braking system? Like to the best of your knowledge, is that technology very similar to the technology being used in these self-driving vehicles? And should we be concerned with the currently available automatic emergency braking systems if phantom braking is an issue with these self-driving vehicles?
Well, it's complicated because, as with any technology that uses computer vision, there can be some similarities. And I make that distinction because for AEB, there are basically 2 kinds of AEBs, those that rely on radar and those that rely on computer vision. And there's possibly a third where there's some kind of combination of the two. Radar is a sensor signal that we're quite mature on detecting, right? We know how to detect a radar signal. We know what that looks like, and we know what causes false radar detections. That is why radar at these close ranges, AEB is really only supposed to work within, a couple of car lengths, for example, of your car. So that helps radar from having these false positives. Unfortunately, computer vision the stereoscopic computer vision is extremely error prone. And indeed, this is actually something that's being debated about new AEB rules that are being proposed by NHTSA. It's not clear that any AEB system that is proposed can meet the strenuous testing criteria because it is so error prone. So you kind of actually stumbled into a very other hot topic, which is what is going on with AEB and computer vision? Me personally, I don't think we should be putting those on cars. I think at best you should have a combination, but computer vision is really problematic. So those same problems in AEB only get multiplied more when you use them for a primary sensor system, because now you're not just looking at a couple of car links in front of you, you're looking way out in front of you. And this is,
Sure.
and we see it over and over again. It is indeed my theory that this is one of the reasons that you don't see Waymos going at on highway speeds. And also the reason that Aurora, the self-driving trucking company, has not yet had any successful deployments, because the computer vision hallucination problem, which is what it is simply unsolved.
Sure. And kind of jumping ahead here, but since you brought it up with the driverless trucks and with Aurora, they're expected to put their trucks out on the, public roadways, like next month is what they said. I mean, based on everything that do you think that might be a little premature? I mean, should we be worried about that?
Yeah, I I have yet to see any quantitative evidence that any vehicle can either predict or mitigate the risk of hallucination. So I don't see anyone able to do it. The reason that it's been okay for Waymo, and I kind of underline okay, because when cars are moving at slow speeds, less than 45 miles per hour, for example, a phantom braking event is uncomfortable, but will not cause massive carnage on the road. That being
Sure.
said, we are seeing these cars getting rear-ended at twice the rate that a normal human-driven car would be rear-ended. So, I mean, there is at least an insurance discussion that we should be having, or that their Waymos, if they're self-insured, they should be thinking about, like, how much money are we spending on being rear-ended? And the problem is because, in the way that our liability is set up in this country, we say, oh, well, if you're rear-ended, it's the person behind you's fault. And so Waymo's been kind of hiding behind that umbrella for a little while. But the
Mhm.
reality is, and I've seen several videos where even humans who are following at a 2 second or more greater braking distance, self-driving cars can actuate much harder and much faster than humans can. So even if you're a good driver and you're trying to put enough room between you and the car in front of you, it's not clear that that's actually enough room. Indeed, one action that I tell people who are driving around self-driving cars is don't get behind them. Try really at any distance, but try to get around them or go a different way, because these phantom braking maneuvers are serious. But again, slow speed, so damage has been contained. This is just simply not going to be able to be contained at high speeds with a big truck.
Yeah, and hopefully we don't see that, but I think we're about to find out here pretty soon. But one thing I want to go back to your study real quick. You talked about the being struck from behind and a phantom braking, but another issue that you found as far as the occurrence of crashes was brought on by what you called unexpected actions by others. And the example that you used was how, oftentimes a tractor trailer will start to back up in order to make a tight right turn. And us human drivers kind of, we have understood that to mean, okay, I'll go ahead and back up, technically they're not supposed to do that, but us human drivers, we're like, no, we're fine with it. That's what you call the norms of the social norms of driving, social norms that self-driving vehicles, for example, do not have. They kind of they adhere to the letter of the law versus, the spirit of the law and what and stuff like that. So the question that I have is, can you kind of further explain this issue that you call uncertainty with self-driving vehicles and how or if that can be mitigated?
Yes, well, I think the uncertainty around self-driving cars, I really put it into two bins. One is that computer vision problem, the
Yep.
hallucinations that we're talking about, and this other bin is the unexpected actions by others. And we see this from that example that you mentioned, that the self-driving cars don't they don't defensively drive, they don't know anything, they don't have ideas, they don't have understandings, they're just responding to statistical predictions. So that is why trucks will do this back into a self-driving car at intersections, because the car doesn't understand that in our social construct of driving, we typically try to give delivery vehicles extra room, for example.
Right.
And that is going to be, I think, even more problematic with if you have a self-driving truck that is, has a significant mass and is expecting that a car is or will see a gap trying to pass on the highway and will take the gap and not understand that there'll be some kind of weird human behavior. And every trucker who's been out there has seen this, where a person sees a truck trying to do that and it's like, oh no, you're not. And the car will speed up to try to get around the truck before that
Right.
happens. And again, remember, I come from a trucking family, so I have heard all the complaints over the dinner table. But that act alone, I mean, is it possible that if the car tries to jump in the gap, that the sensors could see it? It is possible, but the problem is that physics, at some point, physics takes over. And even if you can think that you can avoid it, you're also relying on the other human to be able to respond and act accordingly. And that problem that I talked about before, where self-driving vehicles, trucks, cars, whatever, they can actuate faster and at greater extremes than humans can and might. So this
Sure.
is where if that car jumps into that gap, the truck might overreact, and or under actuate, and then there's some kind of collision that turns into a multi-car collision. So I think that the inability to understand human behavior, because AI doesn't know anything, doesn't understand anything, doesn't actually reason. I think this is where we're going to see, when humans do strange things, that the trucks are going to have a really difficult time responding to what statisticians would call low probability behaviors, but behaviors that every trucker sees every day.
Sure. I mean, isn't this pretty much like the problem for self-driving vehicle manufacturers, which is the being able to adapt to the human behaviors, to human interactions? Because it seems like, self-driving technology and companies have been around for quite a long time. Like, this isn't necessarily anything new, and it seems like we have the jump from level 2 technology to level 4 and 5 technology. We're having a very difficult time making that leap, and it seems like the reason why is because there's like this gap in the ability to advance our technology to learn, to adapt to human behavior. I mean, what is it in your opinion that's preventing technology from making that leap, to making that advance? Like, are we just not there yet? Do we just not have the ability to make that leap?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, because it is a question that applies to both self-driving cars, but also more broadly to generative AI. There's a lot about Chat GPT and whether or not we're all going to go into the matrix with artificial intelligence, super intelligence.
Right.
And I would tell you, across the board, whether or not we're talking about generative AI or we're talking about computer vision and self-driving cars, there is a dangerous tendency for humans to mistake intelligence mimicry with intelligence itself. And so self-driving cars mimic intelligence because under very careful conditions, under, where we call the sweet spot of their operating envelope, where the light, there's lots of light, nice crisp white lines on the road, well-behaved humans, the self-driving cars mimic intelligent vehicles. But as soon as something unusual happens, for example, any operations around police, ambulances, fire trucks, the rotating lights on the cars confuse all self-driving vehicles and cause wacky behaviors. And we do not have that fixed.
Yeah.
And similarly, if the same problem with human behavior in and around trucks, when humans start to have antics, kind of unusual and maybe a little unsafe driving behavior around trucks, the systems don't know anything. There is no intelligence there. There is no intelligence in any chat GPT. Again, these are just statistical predicting machines that are always predicting to the average behavior.
Sure.
And unfortunately, on the roads, we see a lot of not average behavior. And I actually, would go so far to say is truckers, by the unique nature of what they're trying to do, I think they probably see a lot more antics than your average human driver because, they're so big and people are, they see them coming and then they start to change their driving behavior because of what they think the truck may or may not do.
Sure. Yeah. And the way I kind of understand that technology, I think you kind of hinted at it. The analogy that I've always used, and I just want your thoughts on this, which is it's kind of like being able to memorize information to take a test very well. You can memorize information. It's the difference between doing that, but actually knowing the information and then applying it to the real world. So there's a difference between being able to test very well, but then applying that information to real life things. That's a whole different animal. And so it seems like, these self-driving vehicles, they're able to, metaphorically test well, but they can't take that information and then apply it to these real world, situations, which, truck drivers see that. I mean, daily. It's almost, pretty striking. But real quick, so and we talk about level 2 technology and the leap to level 4 technology, but the thing that's left out of the conversation a lot is level 3 technology. And I think the reason why is because the thinking is if you can reach level 3 technology, you pretty much are already near level 4. So why bother with that? But your study kind of briefly mentioned Mercedes level 3 driver pilot system. And so real quick for anyone watching or listening, the difference here. So with like level 2 technology would be like Tesla's full self-driving feature, which is you still have to have your hands on the wheel and paying attention. Mercedes level 3 system, you can take your hands off the wheel, eyes off the road, and it will do the driving under certain highway conditions. So that's currently available in some parts of the country. And you kind of looked at that. And you found so the non-fatal crash rate on interstates for human drivers is about 100 crashes per 100 million VMT. The rate for Mercedes level 3 technology was like more than 5,000 crashes.
Oh,
yeah. And I was like, whoa. I mean, that's like, I think is about 47 times the rate of human drivers. But the difference between that and these self-driving vehicles like, Waymo and Zoox is that this technology is currently commercially available. I mean, I think it only works in like Nevada and California, but it's there. And we're getting closer to that being available than, let's say, completely driverless cars. And so, I mean, should we be more concerned about autonomous vehicles that are currently available to consumers just based on that, that one, level 3 anecdote right there?
Well, I don't think that level 3 is going to mature into any large representation on the roads. We already see that Mercedes is the only company that's doing that. And it isn't clear how many people have bought this technology and how many are using the technology. So I put well, that's a kind of a wait and see. Mercedes has not made it, in my mind, a viable product. People
Sure.
are not racing out to get it. I haven't heard of any lawsuits yet that will happen as a result of some kind of collision. It's just a matter of time. And I think that the reason that companies will not go down that path, a lot of companies won't, is who's liable. If you tell somebody they can take their eyes off the road and they can be on their phone and their laptop, and then there's a crash, I can guarantee you the courts are not going to be on the side of the manufacturers.
Oh,
And
sure.
even that being said, Mercedes has kind of waffled on who are they going to try to hold liable in the case of some kind of crash. So I'm actually not too worried about level 3 because I don't see a big rush to market. I still think that the level 4 is going to be where we struggle to see the kind of improvement that we need in across all domains. And I want to be clear. Look, you can go to San Francisco and Arizona and potentially in Austin now and get a local ride in a Waymo. Take you a couple miles around the city in an urban environment, and I think that the use of these technologies may be effective in small, well-contained areas. So it is possible to ride in a self-driving car right now. And, the jury's still out on whether humans or robots are safer, but you can do it. Rider beware. Uh, but what we haven't seen at all is a company that can do it at highway speeds. Indeed, Waymo had to shut down their Via trucking company. So
Oh, right.
if Waymo was so great and really had this wired at highway speeds, you have to ask yourself, why did they have to shut down their trucking company? So I still think the jury is very much out on anywhere all the time for self-driving cars. And the risk, as everyone on this podcast knows, the risk of lethal damage is, truckers pay that price.
Oh, absolutely.
And nobody wants to have to be that first accident.
Before I let you go, I just kind of want to talk about the next steps forward. I know your research was about the research gaps when it comes to self-driving technology, and it kind of seems like we're kind of a bit in a paradox here in that we don't want self-driving vehicles on public roadways because of their inability to respond to uncertainty and stuff like that. But in order for autonomous vehicles to improve on that, they would need more data in the vehicles, right? So more specifically, they would need real world data since simulations appear to be inadequate. So the question is, how do self-driving vehicles get that real world data without putting everyone in harm's way by being on the public roadways?
It's going to have to come from the states. I mean, while there is a federal government ruling in place for the standing general order, I really expect Musk to do away with that if he hasn't quietly already. I mean, we just haven't heard about it yet because he has been very bitter about the existence of this data set because it definitely shows how much problem Teslas are having. So if we're going to get the data that we need to make sure that these systems are making safe enough progress, it's going to have to come from the states. California is doing a great job of trying to manage this. Texas is doing not a good job. So, and they will regret this because the likely for trucking, the first death, and I would say deaths, because when a truck goes, it's going to be more than one person who dies.
Sure.
That will happen in Texas. There will be an outcry of the public in Texas, and then it will come to pass that the regulatory agencies were just giving the companies a free ride. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, people's deaths are what are going to move this needle.
Well, yeah, I've been saying this for a while that all it's going to take is one fatal crash in this Texas experiment to set the autonomous vehicle industry backwards a few years because the public outcry is going to be pretty severe. So yeah, so that's at the the government level. The last question I have for you is what can these manufacturers, these companies, what is it that they can do to ensure that their products are safer moving forward?
What can the individual companies do?
Yeah, as far as I think in your research, you mentioned that there are areas of study. I know this is the academic level, but I think the private sector, the manufacturers have a hand in this. Like, what information, what data should they be looking into that your research has recognized there's gaps in?
Yeah, no, so this is a tough conversation because, academia has a lot of work we need to do, for example, to solve the hallucinations. The regulatory agencies need to gather the data because they need to gather the data across companies. So when you ask about what the companies do, it really, this is a tricky conversation. So there's been a lot of companies who are teaming with various trucking companies, Kodiak, Aurora, whoever else is left, right? And so what I would tell those companies is you should do the data gathering and make sure that you're tracking it closely. I will tell you that companies who are teaming with the self-driving car companies don't want to gather this data because everyone is very clear that when that first death or sets of deaths happen, there's going to be a massive lawsuit. And this is part of the problem that's happening right now is that people are willfully not gathering data because they recognize that they're going to have to turn over any analyses and discovery.
Yeah.
So for those companies who are kind of sitting on the sidelines, they're not teamed with a self-driving car company. What should they do? To be fair, I would just tell them I take a wait and see approach. If you don't have a dog in this fight, I wouldn't recommend any company get a dog in this fight right
Sure.
now, because this could implode. I mean, we're still at a place where it is not clear whether or not this is actually going to be feasible. And this is one of those times where I tell people sometimes it's better to be number two or three
Right.
or four, right? Sometimes you don't want to be number one. That would be my advice. Kind of take a wait and see approach. I think that's why I do these kinds of podcasts because I think it's great that you get the word out. I'm always happy to come give talks to other people. You should be asking me, other academics, especially if you guys have large conferences where everybody gets together to kind of share best practices. I think the whole industry needs to link arms. I understand that there's potential money to be made, but I also come from a trucking family. And so that's why I try so much to reach out to this crowd because I understand what that means. And I don't think anybody's job is on the line here. It is possible, for example, that trucks could start doing cross country routes that could substantially reduce pressure on drivers for drives that could be excruciating. But we're not anywhere close to being able to get rid of the human in especially for last mile delivery, these types of things where you really need a lot of skill. But even on the highways, when you see all of this um, unusual, unexpected behavior from humans. And so I think we need to proceed very cautiously. And the trucking industry needs to link arms and saying, look, it's not that we're open to new technology, but it's our butts on the line. And any massive self-driving car or truck accident is going to reflect negatively on the whole industry.
Yep.
So
No, I
I
agree.
think there's a lot on the line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, we're about to find out here pretty soon in April once Aurora starts putting out their vehicles. But anyway, hey, I appreciate you taking the time and talking with me. I do appreciate your research that you're working on, kind of quantifying, I think, what we most of us intuitively know, but it's that quantifying it that's really helpful to inform, decision makers. So I appreciate that. So thank you for joining me.
You're welcome anytime.